Okay, so I guess I'll get started. My name is Tom Ritter, and I am a security consultant for a security consulting firm. I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes about different paths in the computer security field, and then I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes on the research that myself and a couple of my coworkers presented at Black Hat and at DEF CON, which is wiretapping cell phones by running and hacking a small cellular tower, and how we did that, and how it can still be done, basically. The job that I do is basically offensive security. So companies will hire me and my coworkers and companies like me to basically hack them. We look at an application or their network or something else, and we break in, steal all of their data, and then tell them how we did it and give recommendations for how they should fix it. It's pretty fun, and you don't go to jail or anything, so that's advantageous. And there are other types of perks to it too. So we do a lot of security research. We look at something that's never been broken before or something that's pretty hard to break, and we try and break it. And if we can, we present at, or even if we can't, we present at conferences like DEF CON about what we did and what we learned and the process through it and all that jazz. So let me see if I can flip through some slides. Okay, so this was the software engineer. Oh yeah, you can be a criminal. I don't really recommend it, but it's there. Security researchers, I talked about a little bit. Penetration testers, that's a security consultant. Government, the government has a huge demand for security people. Obviously, people are trying to hack the government all of the time, sometimes when you work for the government, you get access to stuff that you can't talk about, and that's kind of cool. I don't know, I've never done it, but that's what I hear. And then, of course, there's those guys. And then the other big path is kind of going down the academic route. So when you go to college, you'll kind of get like this sense or feel about how academics work. And you get to do very similar research to security consultants. And academics present at Black Hat, and they present at DEF CON as well. They are often under a university, so they might get some more funding. They generally get to work on it full time. It's got advantages, it's got disadvantages, but it certainly is another path, and I have a number of friends in that community, so that's pretty fun as well. So what I'll talk about now is the actual research that we did. So what we did is we hacked a small device that's called a Femtocell. It looks like a small wireless router that you get at Best Buy, but it's actually a cell phone tower. If you have poor coverage in your home, you live in a rural area or a high-rise, you can get one of these from your cell phone provider to increase your coverage in your home. And they're pretty cheap. Like, we got ours for $250 from the carrier, or about 200 bucks on eBay. But they are little computers, and they can be broken into. And if you break into a cell phone tower, well, you see everything that goes across the cell phone tower. You see phone calls, text messages, picture messages, all that stuff. Your phone will automatically associate to them. I'm sorry, I didn't have a ton of time to prepare, so I'm going to flip through some slides quickly. So we focused on a Femtocell for Verizon. This is a Femtocell that came out in 2010. And it does 3G, so it does data. And what we did was we pulled phone calls, text messages, picture messages, and we did active attacks on web surfing on your phone. So if you visited like Wells Fargo, we would get your username and password. And I'll show a video of that. And we also did some cloning, which I'm not really going to talk about because I don't have a ton of time. But what I am going to talk about is how we looked at the box, how we broke into it, how you can break into this type of box or other embedded devices, and what you can do with it once you're on there. So the Femtocell, like I said, it's meant for your home. You plug it into your internet connection, and it connects back to the cell phone carrier. Cell phones will associate to it automatically. So if you have like family come over for dinner or something, they're going to hop onto your Femtocell because you're going to be the strongest signal in that area. the device itself will connect back to the carrier's network, and that device is encrypted. So if you looked at the traffic that came out of the device, because you control your own home network, you can look at that traffic and it's encrypted. You can't really get anything out of it. But if you're on the device, that's where the data is unencrypted. So that's where we want to go. We want to break into the device so we can see the unencrypted data. We can actually listen to phone calls and stuff like that. Which is exactly what we did. The right-hand model is the newer Femtocell. The left hand is the older one. And the first thing that you do when you want to do any hardware hacking, I don't know if you guys have talked to Joe Grand or anyone. They're much more qualified than me, but I'll do my best. The first thing that you want to do is take a look at the actual device and see what the heck it has. So we looked at this device, and it's got a power jack, it's got internet connection, it's got a GPS antenna, it's got the actual cellular antenna, but it also had this little thing on the bottom. And it's a little tricky to see in that picture, but it's under a rubber plug, and it's an HDMI port. That's the port that you have on your TV. So obviously this thing doesn't do video, so why is there an HDMI port? And we don't really know, but what we do know is the person who makes these things, Samsung, makes a whole lot of TVs. So they probably just had a whole bunch of them laying around in a box somewhere. So it's obviously not going to be video, so what could it be? Well, it's actually a serial port, which means you can plug into it and you'll get a text interface to the actual computer that runs on this little box. So if you've ever used a command prompt in Windows or in Linux, that's what we got when we plugged into it. But first we had to actually figure out how to plug into it. So we took an HDMI cable, we cut it in half, and then we took a serial cable for a computer and we cut that in half. We kind of spliced it together, and then we wrapped it up in a pen because we are not really good at soldering. And this was the next step. So we've gotten console access to the device. We have a login prompt. How do we break into it? Well, the first thing that you can do is you can just try guessing usernames and passwords. And that's a really great thing to do because lots of times they use default usernames and passwords, like admin and admin or something like that. Unfortunately for us, that did not work. So we had to find a couple of other ways in. So we had the cable plugged in when we started the device up. And what happened was it said, okay, I'm going to start up in 5 seconds. Say something if you want to change anything. And we're like, well, yes, we do want to change something. So we hit that button, and then it says, well, what would you like to change? And we said, why don't you just log us right in? Don't give us the username and password, just log us right in to what's called single user mode. And it did. So at that point, we were in, but that actually got fixed in a patch from the carrier. So we had to find a new way in. So this time around, you know when your computer freezes or something and you hit Control-Alt-Delete on Windows? Well, we did the Linux equivalent of that. So Linux is another operating system if you haven't heard of it. It was starting up and we did what's called a magic sysrec, which is basically Control-Alt-Delete. And it stopped everything, including the script that it ran to lock us out. So at that point, we could log right back in again. So I kind of identifying the port and getting console access is, generally speaking, the most important thing to do on hardware hacking. Once you get to that point, the rest of it is, I won't necessarily say easy, but it's easier. So once we got to that point, we were pretty good. And at this point, we are root, we are system, we have complete control over this little computer that's a cell phone tower. So let's start seeing what we can do. So, like I said, it runs Linux, and generally speaking, the first thing that you do when you get root access on a Linux box is go around and look for secrets. Look for any passwords, look for any hard-coded encryption keys, stuff like that. So we poked around the file system, and we did find passwords, and we found IPsec keys, and we found lots of interesting stuff. We also found a whole bunch of custom applications that control it as a cell phone tower. Obviously, no documentation for those. And at that point, we needed to kind of keep looking around, but the console cable wasn't working that great for us. For one thing, if we ran any program and it like hung, like it didn't end right away, we couldn't kill it. We had to pull out the power and restart the entire machine. So that was pretty annoying. There was no text editor, so we couldn't actually edit any files. But what there was a little utility called sed, and basically sed let us edit some files. It was kind of painful, but it worked. It's one of those situations where you just have to see what you have and find a creative solution to the problem. And at that point, we could edit files, and we could enable SSH, which is a remote console, so we could log into the box without the console cable. And that worked quite well. And then we got a nice environment for us to start poking around. And the first thing that we wanted to do was go look for the data, right? We want to hear the phone calls. But when we looked at the data, it was encrypted. So we have to somehow find the decrypted data. And to find the decrypted data, we had to write a whole bunch of code. So we ended up having to find the package that would let us write programs for the Femtocell. So you can't just like take a program from Windows or a program from Linux and like drop it on this computer and just run it. You need to compile it, and that requires this like annoying environment. It was very frustrating to get up and running. But, you know, if you throw enough time at something, you'll eventually knock it over, which we did. So we could keep going and run our own programs. And at that point, we could find the data when it was decrypted. So at that point, we can go after the fun stuff. We can go after the voice, the text, the SMS. But the first thing that we did when we found the decrypted data was that it was in this weird format. It made all these little packets, which, you know, that makes sense. It's a phone call. It'll make like lots of little stuff. But we didn't really know how to play it. And in fact, the specification said that this type of data means do whatever you want and don't expect to play nicely with anybody else. So we ended up spending a lot of time analyzing this data and looking at like the sizes of it and trying to correlate it with something that made sense. But we didn't really, and we eventually came up with an idea which ended up working. And at that point, we could listen to the actual data, which I will show you a video of. Oh, there is... Fortunately, there's no audio. Oh. So... Okay, so Doug is about to get a phone call on a phone that is associated to the Femtocell. And you probably won't be able to hear it coming out of my little laptop speakers, but in the bottom left you can see there's that really fuzzy text. It says, looks like an incoming phone call. So he's going to answer that phone call, and this is actually this is a program that we wrote on the Femtocell to tell us what's happening. So he got a phone call. And he is talking on the phone. And in just a moment, he's going to hang up, and we're going to play back his phone call that we stole off of the device. So we switch over to another computer, and we pull the capture off of the device, and then we run it through the decoding program, and what comes out is the actual phone call. I have no idea if that came out over the speakers, but that is the phone call. Okay, so we got phone calls, but we also wanted to get text messages. And that was a similar process. It took a little bit to figure out how the text messages were being sent across, but once again, if you kind of throw your time and hard work at it, it will come out. And I will show a video of that one also, which does not have any sound. So in the lower right, you can see that we're typing on a phone, and then we can see a couple of messages pop up on the screen. Those are the actual outgoing text messages. We can see the text that they are sending. And then Doug gets that message, and he's going to reply very, very slowly. So I will... And he puts that down, and in a second, the phone will receive the text message, and we will see it come through right there. So that's intercepting a text message and the response. So the next thing that we wanted to go after was actual web browsing. We wanted to go after like the websites that you visit on your phone. And a good example of data traffic is a picture message. So Doug is sending a picture message to another phone, which we will see pop up on the lower left-hand side. It'll be like a little notification that, hey, someone just sent you a picture message, and there they are. And in the lower right, we'll see that the phone is slowly downloading it. And there it is. It's a picture of a street in Manhattan. And then we will switch over to the other computer. We will pull the capture, like all the data off of the Femtocell, and then there's the image. So the next thing that we wanted to do was modify the data. Like all of that is what's called passive attacks, because you're not actually doing anything to it, you're just looking at it. It's passive. We wanted to do active attacks. We wanted to like actually modify the data, make you see something that someone didn't actually send you. And the easiest type of like active attack is to delete it. Like just drop the data on the floor so that people don't receive it. And it just so happens that there are some encrypted messaging programs like iMessage. So if you use iMessage, the messages are encrypted. So we can't read them because it's encrypted. But if you block the connection back home to Apple's servers, the iMessage won't go through. And then your phone will retry that message as a text message, which is not encrypted. And we can see that just fine. So it's called a denial of service. We're denying access to the service. So we can just knock iMessage over and get that data. So let's talk about the actual data itself. Like, let's talk about web browsing. So when you browse something on the web, that uses a protocol called HTTP. And normally this is fairly nice and it displays well in Wireshark. It's easy to understand if you understand HTTP. But in this case, that data was being encoded and split up in very, very frustrating ways. So we had to find some other way to get the data out. We had to basically do a whole bunch of weird tricks and jump through a ton of hoops to get this data. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner is some HTTP. So our goal was to edit a web page, as simply as we could possibly do it. But if you edit anything in HTTP, anything in the request to the website, you have to update a whole bunch of fields. So we had to update fields in the beginning, we had to update fields in the end. And unfortunately, the packets might be rearranged and out of order. So this was kind of a real pain in the neck. And I have this whole long spiel about all the things that we tried. And eventually, what we end up doing is the first step of opening a web page is saying, hey, I want to talk to CNN.com or Google.com. Where is Google.com? And you'll get a reply that says Google is at this address. It's kind of like looking in a phone book. First, we hijack that. So we tell them Google is over here at our server. It's not actually at the real server. So we hijack that request and give them a fake response. Then when they try to talk to our server, what they think is Google, but is really us just hijacking their data, we modify it on the Femtocell to route around some stuff that the cell phone network was doing. Our server gets it and responds back, and back in the Femtocell, we modify it again to undo the stuff that we'd done in the beginning, and then your phone will go and visit our server thinking that it's google.com. And I will show that video as well. So in the lower right-hand corner, we are typing in a phone to wellsfargo.com, the bank Wells Fargo. In the lower left, you can see that we're loading the website. These are all of the requests that the phone is sending. And there is Wells Fargo on the lower right. So now we're going to click on sign in, and we're going to type in a username and a password. And in the upper left, you will see that username and password pop right up. And there it is. So this is an active hijacking of web browsing on a phone. So, what did we learn from all of this? Well, we learned that giving people a small cell phone tower and hoping that they don't break into it is not really going to work. If I give you a computer, I can make it harder for you to break into it, but you have physical control over it. You can break it open, you can connect wires to it, you can do whatever you want to it. I'm never going to be able to keep you out completely. And that's a little bit concerning when 3 of the 4 cell phone networks in the US, AT&T, T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint, they all make these Femtocells, and people can break into all of them. And there are over 30 carriers worldwide, like 30 other companies around the world, that also make these Femtocells. So it seems like I'm just about out of time. So I will spend the remaining time until they kick me off stage answering any questions that I can, if there are any. Is there any way to tell if you are on a Femtocell? So we are going to be releasing an application that will detect Femtocells and put you into airplane mode. But the problem is, the way that we detect Femtocells is we say, hey, are you a Femtocell? And it's possible to lie. How many cell phones at once can connect? It depends on the specific Femtocell. The one that we worked with can support up to 6 active cell phones, like on a call or doing something. And then there are scaled up versions called like microcells and stuff that are installed in like stadiums and casinos that can support a lot more people. Hmm? I misspoke. It's actually T-Mobile who doesn't have Femtocells. And we think it's a good thing, yeah. We don't really like Femtocells. We think a better idea would be if you could place calls on Wi-Fi. Because you don't automatically join untrusted Wi-Fi networks. You have to actually say, yes, I would like to join this Wi-Fi network. So that kind of gives you the option of, yes, you know. Hmm? Yes. So the question was about encryption on the phone into the carrier or all the way to the other phone. So there's 2 flavors of that. One is called end-to-end encryption, and that means that it's encrypted on your phone and it's decrypted on the other person's phone, and that's really awesome and extremely secure and extremely difficult to deploy. And there are apps that do it, but the other person has to have the same app. So like Redphone is an app that does that, but both people have to be using Redphone. The other flavor is encryption from the phone into the actual like carrier, so it goes from phone all the way to Verizon. And in that case, the Femtocell would only see encrypted traffic. And yes, that would make it much more secure. Well, we're on the Femtocell, so we would see it before it gets encrypted. Any other questions? Yeah. How do we figure it was an HDMI to serial? So if you have a circuit board, you can just attach leads to different parts and like see what it comes out and like see what type of power you're getting. So if it's like spiky, that means it's like sending data. If it's constant, that means it's like a ground or something. In our case, we Googled and some guy did it for us. Not really, no. Yeah, we didn't have to. It was... any other questions? Otherwise, I'll let the next guy. Yeah. Why would a cell phone company use femtocells instead of using their own tower? I mean, I don't work at a carrier. I can't really say assertively or for certain, but I mean, if you don't have coverage because you live out in like, you're like the only person in an area, it's really expensive to install a cell phone tower like just for you. So this is like $250. I mean, they could sell it to you or give it to you, and then it's kind of like, well, that problem's taken care of. Why don't they just do everything over Wi-Fi? I don't know. I wish they would. So the range on a femtocell is relatively small. Like the official specs is about 40 feet. So, I mean, you can kind of get around it that way, you know, if you have a large backyard or something. Yeah, and also you can build a Faraday cage. You can like, I wouldn't say aluminum foil, some other stuff, copper sheathing and stuff. So you can, and you can go after it that way. And I mean, Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, a couple $100, and there are a whole bunch of resources on embedded device hacking and that type of stuff. So it's definitely within people's reach to like start poking around with. Yeah. How hard would it be to make your own femtocell using like a software-defined radio or a little computer? Not. So the nice attractive thing about the femtocell is it automatically remotes into like Verizon's network and passes all the traffic. So that would be where you would like not be able to do it, because you'd call up Verizon and you say, hey, I'd like to connect my box into your internal network and send like phone calls through it, and they'd be like, no. But you can use similar stuff like OpenBTS and stuff to set up your own cell phone tower that doesn't connect to any carrier, and it just kind of like works. It would go like phone to phone. I'm not the best person about that, but I do know it's possible. All right, I really have to go, I'm sure, but I give you my card if any of you want it. You can send me questions. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it.